So I'd like to invite Sarah Stroup and Netta Avineri to the stage now, because we're going to start looking at how stories and conflict connect.
And all the amazing things that they do. Hi,
Welcome
ladies.
to Washington.
Hello. Glad to be here.
Thank you for being here. We're going to cut and run in just a minute, but just to clarify, Sarah, does conflict transformation end it? So it's all done and we live happily ever after?
I know many of us wish that was the case. Conflict does not go away, it merely changes shape.
Ooh. It merely changes shape, and we do that as storytellers?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And Netta, what's the connection between conflict transformation and then storytelling?
Yeah, I think the main idea is that we're trying to build towards constructive conflict, so harnessing the conflict for productive ends, and so story can be a really impactful tool that we can harness in the service of conflict transformation.
Okay.
Ooh,
well,
important.
It's all yours. We're leaving. Goodbye.
Take it away.
We'll be back.
Good morning. My name is Sarah Stroup. I'm a political scientist. I study transnational activism and responses to civil conflict. And I am finishing my third year as director of the Conflict Transformation Collaborative at Middlebury. It is my great pleasure to be here with you and to be here with my friend and colleague, Netta Avineri.
Hi, everyone. My name is Netta Avineri. I'm a faculty member at the Middlebury Institute of International Studies at Monterey, focusing on intercultural communication, and the incoming director for the Conflict Transformation Collaborative.
The theme of this year's summit is the climate divide. For the next few minutes, we are going to introduce the idea of transforming divisive conflicts through storytelling and journalism. But before we get started, we wanted to note this current moment. In his new book, Possible, international mediator William Ury says that transforming conflict is an inside-out process. It starts here. When you or I are in the middle of conflict, Ury says, it is important for us to go to the balcony, to step out of the dance of conflict and check in with ourselves and the context that we find ourselves in. When Netta and I talked with Frank over the summer about this theme for Planet Forward, we could not foresee this political moment. Finding ways through conflict might, for you, feel more important than ever. It could also feel completely overwhelming. Netta and I hopefully will bring a fresh perspective to your work and conversations, but we also come to Washington, D.C. as outsiders. So as we were thinking about this, we thought that we would frame the Planet Forward Summit as an opportunity for us together to go to the balcony. For a day and a half, we get to step out of the churn of the news cycle. We get to think about the ways in which we understand our relationships to the planet and our relationships with each other. We have a chance to reflect on the role of stories in transforming those very relationships. As we do that work together, everyone in this room has different things at stake. So as we begin, we invite you to consider 3 questions. 2 of these I'll ask you to consider on your own, and then the third we'll do together. So the first is, what are the environmental conflicts that you care about? Which feel like personal issues for you, and which feel more distant? That first question is essentially, what is at stake for you in this conversation? Second, who do you want to be with the people in this room over the next day and a half? What conversations feel like your comfort zone, and what conversations feel like more of a challenge or more of a stretch? What do you need to tend to in yourself to have those difficult conversations? 2 questions, perhaps, to think about on your own. A third question that we'll think about together. Okay, we wanted to start our conversation together by checking in on where everybody in this room is on conflict. So I'm going to ask everybody, even though I just said we're going to step away from the news cycle, please don't open up your browser, but do open up your camera and scan this QR code. It will take you to Poll Everywhere. You'll be asked to register. Just skip that. And it'll take you to a question that says, name 3 words that come to mind when you hear the word conflict. Again, skip the registration, go to the question. Please answer those questions one at a time. And if we can bring up the poll, we'll see what people in this room think of.
Is it working for anybody?
Aaron, can you make the poll live, please? How about now?
It says waiting for Netta Avineri's presentation to begin.
I activated it. It's activated.
Yeah, let's do shout-outs. Okay, put those phones away. Just kidding. Luckily, we have analog options here. Okay, let's go. We went this way first. Let's start over here. Name a couple of words that come to mind when you hear the word conflict. Genocide. Tension. Fear. Trauma. Pain.
Opportunity.
Anger. Opportunity. Okay, this side of the room. Necessary. Disagreement. Resources. Injustice. Conflict resolution. Transforming. Sorry again. Compromise. Progress. Say again. Ho'oponopono. Ho'oponopono. Great. Anything else? Despair. It's real, folks. So, if I made a word cloud for you, you would see a diverse array of ideas and thoughts that come to mind as we hear the word conflict. We each may have read 0 books about conflict transformation, but every single person in this room has been in conflict because you have been in relationship with other people. Conflict is part of the human experience. And some of us hear the word conflict and we have a negative reaction. And that's understandable because conflicts can be terribly destructive. And yet conflict is unavoidable. In any relationship, in any society, there is difference. How will we engage in that difference? So the first principle of conflict transformation is that conflict is part of the human experience. If we are able to shift the ways in which we engage in conflict from destructive to more constructive methods, it can deepen our relationships, foster closer collaboration, and even lead to positive organizational and social change. At Middlebury, we are doing this work with students and a vast variety of stakeholders. We're working with K through 12 teachers, with undergraduates, with graduate students. We're doing this with community partners. We're consulting with businesses and other organizations. And across those many students and programs, we have 3 core learning goals. And we want to share those with you because we think that they're relevant for storytelling as well. Across the vast number of interventions to foster constructive conflict, the first necessary step is to foster that new understanding of conflict, to move from an understanding of conflict that's always negative to seeing it either neutrally as just part of the human experience or more positively as introducing possibilities for social change. Second, we need to practice skills to understand ourselves and others. These are hard. They're like muscles. They atrophy if we don't use them. So practicing those skills. And then finally, fostering a commitment to act, to not just see conflict differently, but to do conflict differently. One of the resources that we use to do this work at Middlebury is Amanda Ripley, a journalist, whose project Good Conflict highlights this dynamic for storytellers. Ripley notes that the stories that we tell can escalate high conflict dynamics, but stories can also transform conflict. You might have heard the phrase, facts don't change minds, stories do. Ripley tells us that we have the ability to be primed to be curious, to be primed to think about complexity, which is awesome, she says. This insight that stories can foster curiosity and complexity informs all sorts of interventions, from solutions journalism to an activist strategy called deep canvassing to what some mediators do, narrative mediation. If we are able to shift the stories that we tell, we can take a step towards more constructive conflict. There are lots of different interventions. Some of these might be familiar to you. Some of them you might want to learn more about. But across all of them, a central theme is the role of communication.
Thank you, Sarah. So we're going to talk a little bit about how is conflict connected to story. So our core idea here is that story can be a tool that we use to harness for constructive conflict purposes. And so as we all know, a really good story, a good story arc has conflict at its center, whether that's conflict character conflict, character self, conflict with the community, conflict in a particular context. And so that conflict provides the impetus for change, and that's what we're looking for in a story. And so one of the first things that we like to think about in relation to conflict transformation is, at what scale is the story that you're telling? Okay, so we talk a lot about, is your story about the macro scale, the big picture, the holistic view, the bird's eye view? Is it more about the meso scale? Is it more about institutional, systemic structures? Is it more about the micro, the smaller scale, right? The more interpersonal scale of the conflict? And or is it about what we call the micro, the intrapersonal, the individual conflict scale? And so we can think about the scales of conflict, we can think about the scales of change, and we can think about the scales of story. And as we're talking this morning, we want to be kind of priming you for the kinds of topics you're going to see throughout the day, and how can we use conflict as an impetus for change. So another set of key ideas that we like to think about as it relates to conflict and storytelling. I was talking with my students the other day in our storytelling for change class that we're not necessarily telling the story about a conflict. We're always selecting a story to tell and then selecting the details accordingly. And a core component of conflict transformation also is not just identifying people's positions, but also what are the interests that are underneath where they stand on a particular issue. And when you do that kind of conflict analysis, you have a deeper understanding of the conflict without people becoming kind of almost a caricature of themselves. People are characters in a story, but you don't want them to become kind of so polarizing that there's no common ground. And so another component of conflict transformation and storytelling is identifying that common ground. So figuring out what are the values that are at the core of what we're interested in, and how can that then move us and create new narratives together. And a couple of you were mentioning as we did the analog word cloud that you were thinking about resolution. So what's the difference between conflict resolution and conflict transformation? One of the core ideas that John Paul Lederach highlights is that when we look at a particular episode, a particular topic, or something that's happening in a given context, we always want to look both at the episode but also at the epicenter. What is sort of underneath the issue, the structures, the systems, the histories that are creating the episode? If we don't look at the root causes, we're going to have more episodes, right? And so conflict resolution is about a particular episode. Conflict transformation addresses the epicenter underneath. So one thing that we'd like for you to be thinking about, I guess we could make this a little bit interactive if you'd like to raise your hand. So when we think about our roles as storytellers, for some of us, we might be coming to the storytelling enterprise as, I'm thinking I'm an advocate, I'm more of an activist, I'm more of a truth teller, I'm more of an educator, I'm more of a conduit. So raise your hand if you feel like part of your role as a storyteller is to be an educator. You're trying to raise awareness about the topics that are important to you. You feel like that's your role, okay. How many of you feel like part of your role as a storyteller is to be a truth teller? That you're saying that is an essential component of what I'm trying to do. Okay. How about you feel that you're using your storytelling for advocacy purposes? Okay. So you're trying to encourage people to do things out in the world as a call to action. How about activist? Okay. Any of you feel like you're more of a neutral conduit? Right, that you don't necessarily have as much of a positionality, but you're trying to Okay, yeah. And wherever you stand, and many of you raised your hand multiple times, however you think about your role or your roles, that's going to obviously shape your decision-making along the way as you're building out your story. And there's several different conflicts or tensions that might come up as you build your story out. Okay, so I like to say that we need to pay attention to tension in order to set intention, right? We have to name those tensions explicitly. And some of those tensions might be how do I present objective facts? How do I also recognize my own subjectivity as it relates to the topic of interest? How do I create complex stories, but also make them clarified and simple in such a way that they reach various and different audiences? How do I balance slowing down to deeply understand a topic and a group and a community, but also recognize the urgency of the moment and the urgency of the issue? How do I both listen, but also if I'm trying to do advocacy work, persuade, right? How do I balance? And those are tensions that we need to name and figure out how we might want to navigate. How do we also talk about a particular case, context, culture, community, and also make things general enough that anybody has a way in to understand? And also, how do we recognize that we have expertise to offer, but also we want to enter spaces in a way that's humble? So these are just some of the tensions that I think can be potentially transformative as we're building out story. So the last component that I wanted to highlight, or last couple of quick components, are just how conflict plays out along the story process in terms of story framing, story forming, and storytelling, and figuring out, working with colleagues, peers, classmates, your mentors, to figure out how you want to navigate those conflicts along all of the different steps of the process in order to coalesce with your audience, whether it's for awareness raising, advocacy, activism, figuring out who the spectrum of allies are that you want to reach, whether they're actively opposing you, passively allying with you, and harnessing conflict in the service of transformative means and ends. So a huge component of today is building coalitions, connecting with each other, and figuring out how collectively we can work through conflict in a way that is productive for us all. So thank you so much. I think we'll wrap up there. So thank you.